monoplane that had gone to search for Kingston Smith in 1929. It was forced down. The two pilots lost their lives from first. The bodies were recovered and brought back. The plane was left and it went missing for nearly 50 years. 48 years later, the Northern Territory surveyor was crossing the Tanami Desert and he was fixing one of his punctures, and he looked and he saw a spoked wheel sticking out of a hitchy bush, and he raced over to it and realised it was a plane and looked around for bodies. And when he finally got back to Darwin, he found that they looked up the engine number, and that was the lost Kookaburra. And so lots of people searched for it. After 16 expeditions, I organised an expedition from Australia, from Sydney, and I went up into the Tanami Desert just out of Darwin. Now I had a photo with me of the Kookaburra when it was found by the Northern Territory surveyor, which was sort of a spoke with a bit of a skeleton and everything. I'd seen that. But I'm flying along in the helicopter, we were flying backwards and forwards, and as we turned the chopper, I saw the Kookaburra. I saw the spoke wheel, everything, identical. I said, I've seen it, we found it. We swung around again, it wasn't there. There was a sort of a bit of a stump, which wasn't really very like it at all. So we went back to camp and I said, well, I just don't understand it. I saw it absolutely. Now, luckily for me, the next year later, we found the Kookaburra miles away from that location. But it shows you what the human brain can do. So always remember, seeing is not believing. Recently, a friend of mine who does a lot of walking up in the Blue Mountains said he saw, what's it called these days? The Blue Mountain Cattle.
Disco Panther.
Oh, Disco Panther, that's it. And when I said, well, I don't think you saw it, he said, Dick, I saw it and it's true. I said, well, I certainly wouldn't believe what I saw. So I think that's very important. Now, I'll tell you another little water divining story. The New Zealanders had heard that we were offering this money, which by then went up to $100,000, for anyone who could divine. And so they did a major television program there, and they sent to Australia New Zealand's top diviner, and he could divine brass with 100% accuracy. And I said, look, don't send him until you do a check, because he had a millionaire backer. And I said, get your cardboard shoe boxes and all the rest of it. And the backer said, I don't need to do that, I know this bloke can do it. Anyway, so he sent him over, and for some reason the test was to take place at Gosford, with the Gosford radio station. And suddenly I realised I had to get up to Gosford, so I jumped in the helicopter, and then I realised I never have any money. So I quickly said to my wife, have you got any money? She said, well, I've got the cheque, you know, the household account. So I said, quick, so I wrote out a cheque for $100,000. And she said, there's only $160 in the account. So I flew up to Gosford, and there's the radio station, and there's the man that's come from New Zealand. And so I get out the cheque, and I hand the cheque to the radio station manager. And I said, you're to be the judge, and you're to hand the cheque over $100,000. And he's shaking, he said, oh, I've never held so much money in all my life. Anyway, by the way, if the person had been able to do it, we would have got the money, but at the particular time it certainly wasn't in the account. Well, the person started, first of all, he brought with him a brass door knocker, and he demonstrated the fantastic, he put the door knocker down, and the rod, you couldn't believe, I mean, you'd hard to believe it was involuntary muscle reaction that was doing it. And he showed it everywhere, so he said, I'm now ready to do the test, and so we got out the shoe boxes, and I said, why don't you use your piece of brass that you brought with you? And he looked at me and said, you wouldn't let me do that? And I said, of course I would. If you can find that more than 1 in 10 times in these shoe boxes. Well, so first of all, he then looked suspiciously around and he found a briefcase that he got moved away because that became effective. So once again, we did the test where we said, we'll mark the box. And in this particular case, we put it in number 2. He was talking so much, he went up and down and divine box number 3. And his wife said to him, hold on, darling, think what the box it was put in. So even when we did the test, when he put it in the box himself, he got it. Now, you laugh, but the interesting thing is, I've never yet found a fraudulent person. These people are absolutely genuine. And don't be careful about thinking, yes, well, they're a bit bonkers, but I'm not, because I believe it's part of our human condition. We all have something, let's hope, people here in a very minor way where we can delude ourselves into believing something. So in this particular case, and by the way, other than me, in this particular case, he did the test and he got 1 in 10. And that was, of course, the test of chance. Now, since then, we haven't spent a lot of time on water divining because I must admit people have contacted me from time to time, and it's just irritating to waste time when you know what the result's going to be. But from time to time, it is a very simple way. If someone says they can read the future or they are talking to someone who's dead, it's a very hard thing to prove. Cold readers are very good at their job. But a simple water divining test is very simple to believe, and of course it shows quite clearly, I think, to a skeptic about how human beings can delude themselves. And even when shown quite clearly that they couldn't do what they said they could do. Many of them claimed, oh well, I really wasn't any good at divining in plastic pipes. We said, well, why did you do that test? And the interesting thing is that at one stage over about a 30-year period, the Water Conservation Commission did a survey, it's still around, where they checked the number of drills that were put down with divining and the number that weren't. And the divined wells got around about a 94% hit rate, but the non-divine wells got a 96% hit rate. So it shows you that if you used a geologist who knew what it was. Of course, we've got to be careful, because when I wanted to get some drilling done on my own farm, my manager said, I've rung up the water drilling company, it's a big water drilling company, and they've got a diviner. And I thought, oh, here goes. But when I actually met him, and he realised I was a skeptic, he said, oh look, he said, everyone believes in divining. He said, so I come out and I walk around and think it's the most logical place from my experience. Then I get out the rods and wobble them there and they all believe it. So it's amazing how... Now I mentioned seeing is believing. I think another great example of this is that in the 1930s, an aircraft flying from Brisbane to Sydney went missing. It's the famous case where the plane, I won't mention where it crashed at the moment, but it was flying, and in those days there was only one plane a day, and it was sighted all the way down the coast, from Brisbane, Lismore, but the two best sightings were from a policeman and a school teacher at Gosford. So they searched around the Hawkesbury River, if the plane hadn't landed on the ground, searched and searched for a week and couldn't find anything. After a week, a young man called Bernard O'Reilly in the McPherson Ranges, just 70 miles south of Brisbane, just had a feeling and asked. Some of the people said, we saw the plane fly over, but it was really bad weather. So he started walking through the rainforest and went for 8 hours, finally climbed up on a bit of a lookout, and across the other side of the ravine he saw one dead tree. And he took all day to get to the dead tree, and as he got close to it, he's yelling out, he heard some voices. And 2 people were alive. I think by then it was 8 days. The plane had crashed, 3 were alive, 1 had gone to get help and he died. The interesting thing about that was the plane had never gone further south than the McPherson Ranges, but it was sighted all the way by genuine people. And as I mentioned, seeing is not believing. That what's happened is their mind has said, I would imagine, they've seen the plane fly over for probably 12 months. Then when they hear it's missing, somehow the mind gives a flip and says, oh, that sighting of last week was actually yesterday. And that's what happened. So you've got to be very sceptical about all of these things. Any questions? Any
a water diviner.
Oh, good. There's a water diviner on the Lithgow Council. Yeah.